What's good, everybody? Welcome to another exciting episode of Full Circle. I'm your host, as always, Harmon Jr. Please feel free to find me at Harmon Jr. on all your favorite social media websites. All right, people. So, guess what? I know it's been about 8 episodes, but there will be no Pokemon on this episode. Not a mention. If it is mentioned, it will only be in passing. It is not a main topic. It is not a subtopic. Pokemon month is over. Gen 9 reveal over. So, now that we're done with fun stuff, we're going to talk about big boy serious video game business today. Yes, people, we're going to have one of our another famous deep dive, not so fun, real talk episodes. It'll be fun. We always have fun. But to do that, I've got a man that I've gotten to know recently very well. More so than just, what he says on Twitter. So I was like, man, serious episode. I need a serious guest. Please give it up for the one and only Will Borger. How are you doing today, sir?
I am doing wonderful and super stoked to be here, man. Thank you for having me.
Oh, man, of course. Thank you for joining me. And Will, real quick, just in case people at home don't know, who are you and what do you do?
So I am a fiction writer, essayist, game critic, college professor. I wear men of many hats. But yeah, I've done a little bit of everything, and I've been writing about games for almost 10 years at this point. Just mostly for smaller outlets, but yeah, that's me.
That's what I like. As a man of the decade club myself, I appreciate that you're still here because it is hard to still be here.
It sure is.
I always tell people, I've known people to get in right out the gate a professional career and be gone to another industry within 3 to 5 years. It's actually not that uncommon. I've seen people rise to the tops and sink to the lowest depths in half the time that you've been writing. So congratulations to you, sir.
Thank you.
So people, like I said, we've got a slightly heavy episode for you today. But I promise you, it's going to be intellectual and fun. We're going to be talking about video game criticism. Yes, video game critics. The power that they wield. Do they wield it correctly? Do they need to change how they wield it? And the relationship between critics and viewers. How sacred is that? And no one paid me for this episode to say that. I mean, if they did, I would still say it. They can't stop me. But before that, we are going to be talking about the video game industry versus Russia. Yes, we all know the war with Russia and Ukraine is currently going on. And for the first time ever, the video game industry, not as a whole, but collectively have taken stances against this in ways I've never seen the industry do before. And I'm sure, even with the best intentions, this will be a can of worms for years to come. But before all that, continuing with our theme, we're going to be talking about video game story writing, and specifically AAA big blockbuster game stories. If you haven't heard, guess what? God of War, not the original, the remake, well, not remake, continuation of God of War is getting the story for, TV now because, I mean, why not? We got BioShock, The Last of Us, now we got God of War. And, well, I guess I want to start this off with a philosophical question of, what this is a chicken or the egg scenario. Has video game writing gotten so good that it is better than what current TV writers and producers can do, and that's why they're going to video games? Or have video games just gotten popular and they're just trying to cash in on the stories?
I think it's a complicated question. You're right. It's a chicken and egg scenario. I think it's a little bit of both. Not necessarily that games writing has gotten better than TV writing or better than film writing, but it's gotten more like those things. It's gotten, I think, especially for AAA games, stuff has gotten a lot more grounded. It's gotten a lot more, for lack of a better term, like ambitious in the way that it wants to deal with stuff. Whether or not it succeeds or fails is, another topic for discussion. But it's gotten a lot more influenced by stuff like film, like long-form fiction. Like you can trace stuff like The Last of Us back to The Road, by Cormac McCarthy. But I also think that it has gotten to a point where it is trying to cash in, right? Because people look at these franchises and they're like, oh, this game sold however many, God of War sold like 20 million copies, something like that.
Something like that.
Why not? Yeah, why not, right? And I think it also speaks to our larger media landscape where we're seeing a lot more adaptations of stuff rather than original work, especially, in Hollywood, and also just what's being made for, your streaming service, what's being put on television. So if you have this property that's already popular, that a lot of the work has already been done, that is grounded enough that it will probably resonate with like a mainstream audience who might not know what God of War is, but might be like, "Oh, that looks cool, right?" You saw it in the trailer. I think it will. It's a scenario where they're like, "This is the right time," right? And you see, like, the Halo series that who's doing it? What is it? Showtime, right? Is finally
Paramount Plus.
Paramount. That's right. It was originally with Showtime. Is like that's finally getting kicked off. Like I think a lot of this stuff has been trying to happen for several years. But we're also getting to the point where, in the rush to adapt more stuff that already exists, people are looking at games and like, why not, right? Why not?
Yeah. And, I will say the biggest plus that it has going for it is that a lot of these stories that we would even consider classics to the wider, known audience, the wider world, etc., wherever you want to call it, they don't know these stories. Like, I mean, God of War is something simple, like I said. That's not unique. It's just, Zeus, Mount Olympus, that whole thing. This one's, dealing with Norse mythology and stuff. But, it's these stories have been told, video games aren't new to some of these stories. And at first I thought, we were going safe with this. So, you have things like Uncharted, Last of Us, God of War, which, in and of itself is just you could look at the story alone and it could survive on its own. A little less with God of War. I feel like the gameplay, was really essential to that game, but not needed. But then you have things like BioShock, and I want to talk about this, but I've talked about the topic too much, but now it seems like a good time. It's like, okay, this is the problem I think we're going to run into. We're going to start hitting games that don't make sense in non-game formats, and I think BioShock is one of them. And depending on how they want to do God of War is because if they're following the game story, it could possibly work. But if they're trying to do a new story within the game, I think it falls flat. Halo was safe. Uncharted was safe. The Last of Us, that's super safe. But God of War, that's a little test. In BioShock, I feel like it can't be done. So as this trend continues, we're going to hit the point where they're going to be like, all right, what's popular? Let's make a Metal Gear movie. I think any attempt to make Metal Gear movie just fails instantly. They're going to be like, okay, let's make, a Destiny movie. And it's like, that game has a story, but you see where I'm going with this. We're going to start hitting this wall of, okay, now we're just using the IP's name, but are we making anything substantial or worth watching? Because either the people who are fans of the series won't like it because it's either, not canon enough or it's just too out there where it's not even the same product. And people who maybe aren't familiar with the series will jump in and be like, I don't even know what this is. It makes no sense because they don't have that game context aspect knowledge of the lore.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting balancing act because, like you said, like stuff like Uncharted is basically just Diet Indiana Jones, right? It's your Diet Coke to your Coke. That's easy. God of War, based on Norse mythology, based on Greek mythology, easy in for that. But even for that, I think, to your point, it's going to be harder to adapt it because so much of God of War is built around the actions that you take as a player, right? There's a lot of fighting in God of War. How do you, even if you, maybe remove some of that, add some more character moments, do a lot of that stuff, that game is as long as it is because you spend most of that time in combat. If you cut the cutscenes down, it's probably only a few hours. How much of a TV show do you want to make, right?
Yeah.
And BioShock, I don't even know how you do it because BioShock is a game. It is designed to be a game. The main character in BioShock, well, the first one, right? Not really a character. The main character in the second one, not really a character, kind of a player avatar. I guess you could do BioShock Infinite. But
that would be the easiest per se.
Yeah.
For sure.
But even then, so much of it is, this is interesting because, and I don't always think the BioShock games play super well, but you had interesting decisions to make as a player. You had powers, you had guns, you had skyhooks and crazy things that you could do. But again, and I think this really comes down to, the reason for a long time that I've argued games have problems with storytelling is because you have to give the player something to do. 9 times out of 10, especially in the AAA space, that's combat. You can't do that much combat on a film or a TV show. You have to have stuff that is not that, right? Like in a game, you don't think about man, we're doing a lot of fighting. But if you're watching an action movie, you need lulls between another crazy sequence. I guess unless you're John Wick, you can get away with it. But also,
you know what you signed up for.
Yeah, what you're going in for. You're going to go see Keanu Reeves be mad about his dog and kill a bunch of Russian guys. That's the way it is.
Yeah, and so I've said this before, and like many things I say, people think I'm crazy until the patterns start to pile up. And I said this many episodes ago. I was like, and no one really agreed with me, but now I think a case can be made with greater evidence is depending on the strength of these shows. So we still haven't seen. I think Uncharted did well. I don't have the numbers, but I don't know what Halo's gonna do. I don't know what Last of Us gonna do. But if these things do well, and the game studios themselves see mad returns, I'm worried we'll end up with more AAA games that are more worried about a story they can sell or characters they can sell than providing a good game. And yes, I mean that could just be just paranoia to some people, but money speaks volumes in every industry, and video games not exceptions to that. I mean, look at the mobile market. People thought for the longest time, it was the whole stigma that, these aren't games, whatever, you're not a gamer. But then company after company kept seeing the dollar signs, and they started putting real money into mobile games. Things like, okay, we have the PS5 version, but we also need the mobile version. 10 years prior, like hell, even like maybe 4 or 5 years ago, that would have been an afterthought. Like, I mean, I guess, but now that's like a part of the conversation. And so who's not to say a part of the conversation would be, could we sell this to a network?
Yeah. And, I think your point about mobile games is spot on, especially like you look at stuff like Call of Duty Mobile, which is huge. Nobody even thinks about that. Like when we talk about game coverage, right? We don't think about, there are millions of people playing mobile games. And in the same way, when you look at the way that games are produced, I think they've been leaning more towards films for a really long time. And I think for Sony especially, right? Because they're like, we have an in-house production studio like that we could use. We own a film company. Why not use it? Why not take these properties that we already have that in many ways are trying to be cinematic and just adapt them? And I think if those things are successful, especially in, like the AAA space, you're going to see stuff move towards that direction. I think you're already starting to see it, to be honest. That when games are made, when IPs are created, a lot of stuff is how can we make this a multimedia franchise? Not just games, but books, like figures that they want to sell, collectibles, like all that stuff that we traditionally associate it with, but they're looking at it from a bigger picture. And Halo, like, we don't think about this as much now because it's been this way for such a long time. But you remember, like, before the game even came out, the first one, there was like a book. And now it's like, oh, everything has a book. Like, Mass Effect has books, Dragon Age has books. Like, I'm sure that there's going to be this push to be like, all right, whatever you make, it has to be something that we can translate into another medium. And then you get into, okay, well, does that affect your narrative design? At some point, it has to, right? You can't do really crazy, weird stuff at a certain point, because if it has to be adaptable, you're limited, especially if you want a live action adaptation of it.
Yeah, because, well, I think, Arcane was good because, that's animated. And so, you're not limited in that way. And, but League of Legends is an interesting brand. I feel like, years from now, we'll do a case study on it because it just, like, I mean, they have a pop group, a real life sell CDs pop group. And that just blows my mind at times.
Yeah. And also, like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, and the Arcane is also a weird one, right? Because Arcane has been in production for a really long time. And it cost a lot of money. To the extent, and the other thing is, like, right, how much are these companies willing to spend on this outside stuff? Riot has tons of money. For them, this is, whatever, we can spend all this money on this thing and it can take years and we don't care, right? But, like, if you are a publisher that maybe doesn't have Riot money, which is probably almost everybody else, you're going to have to start thinking about how much do we want to dedicate to this? How much time do we want to dedicate to this? And then I think you're going to get us a lot of stuff that just isn't as good. I think Arcane's an outlier.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. And, I think it's going to be a weird kind of like in reverse return to form. So, you're old enough to remember when every major movie came out, cartoon or otherwise, it got a video game. Like, I remember renting A Bug's Life from Hollywood Video and being like, oh, it's Bug's Life. I watched that movie and now I'm playing. And, you had the Toy Story game. You had the famous Spider-Man 2, which is like, quintessentially the only great movie video game tie-in. And then, that kind of went the day of the dinosaur. I mean, it went the way of the dinosaur because in all reality, they sucked. They were quick. had to tie in. They didn't have a lot of time, yada, yada, yada. And we got it, but people eventually stopped doing it. I don't know if it just became too costly to make these games that weren't going to sell well. And, you can't rent no more. But now, we're going to get this weird, okay, it's not, here's this movie coming out. We got to make a game. Here's this game coming out, and we need to make it into a production TV or movie otherwise. So I'm like, and I'm wondering, similar to that problem, is this going to make games worse, per se? Because right now, it's just, we're working retroactively. These are games that have been out, were, meant to be games, closer to games than they were, TV productions, at least I hope. And, and let's say it happens exactly how I think it is. Like, we get these, like, like I said, we're trying to sell it across multimedia things. Will we start to get to that point where, like, we hit this era of, like, clearly this is a, made-for-TV game, since the coin a term. And then, we get these games where we're like, they're cookie cutter and we know what to get. And then it's like, and then they'll sell for a while. And then we'll get to this point where we're like, well, these stop being games. I'm not going to play this anymore. Let's go, find a good indie or what have you.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right. And I do think that's coming. And I think in a lot of ways, we're already starting to see it. And this is not necessarily a shot at anything in particular, but I'm going to use an example of a recent game that came out and was immediately overshadowed by another big game. You look at Horizon, right? Horizon is a game that has been focus tested to death. Everything about that game has been focus tested, focus grouped. This is what we're going to do. It's built on this existing platform of this kind of genre, but it really wants to be cinematic, right? Like, it has this big ambition of, like, we're going to be serious. We're going to be cinematic. We're going to do all these things. And I think as time goes on and projects by necessity get safer and have to get pushed into multimedia franchises, games are going to become A lot safer, and B, they're going to rely on stuff that already exists. You're not going to see stuff push the envelope as much. And then it's also going to be a problem of if you have a game that is that you want to make into a film, into a TV show, whatever it is, they're probably going to start production on that at the same time or similar to, right? Oh, okay, you want to make this game. We want to start production on this thing because it's going to take a really long time to cast the right people, get the right production company, do all this stuff that we need to do. And I think it would be really silly to assume that those things are not going to impact one another in some way, maybe in ways that we haven't seen yet, right? Where if it's like, okay, these are the people that we have doing the TV production, they must be involved in the production of the game, especially if we're gonna, make this shared thing, this thing that can be exploited across multiple types of media.
Yeah, man. Ultimately, I guess, because I don't want to sound too pessimistic, because ultimately I feel like, it will probably be a bad thing, but the world has a way of balancing itself out, so I guess, it will come. But it's one of those things where, like, we seriously need to, look at that or be wary of that, because I remember, so before all this, I'm going to plug myself because I love when I'm right, when people don't think I will be right. Yes, I have some hubris about me. I do not care. I kept telling people, what's going to happen this generation? What's going to happen? Every major game is just going to be a platform exclusive in some way, shape, or form. I was like, I said, we're going to see the death of multi-platform games. And this was before Activision. This was before, all the craziness broke down. And so, we got Activision. And then Sony bought, who did they buy? I forgot.
Housemarque, Bungie.
Yeah, Bungie. There we go. Yeah, and then, all these acquisitions started happening. And, that statement, became, because, they make the statement, oh, of course, Destiny 2 is going to be multi-platform for now. But we all know the next one's probably not. The one after that's not going to be anything Bungie makes, same thing with Bethesda. And now this becomes, not such a crazy idea because Nintendo's always in-house. You know what I'm saying? So so we already know Nintendo's not sharing no IPs. And now if everything is owned by either Microsoft or Sony, why would they share IPs? And people are like, how would they survive? I'm like, Nintendo has already showed us you can be underpowered, outdated, and have good IPs and be just fine. So I don't think it's a crazy world to be like, Call of Duty won't be on Xbox. Why should it be?
Right. And I've been saying something similar for a really long time, especially, I think, several years ago. I think it was when THQ got shuttered that I started thinking about, You guys don't understand what the cost of development is going to do to these things and the cost of maintaining these platforms. Because at a certain point, you have to have people buy your platform, right? And for Sony especially, like that's their business. Microsoft is not a gaming company. They can do whatever they want. They have Windows money. They have, Microsoft Office money. They have Microsoft Cloud money. Xbox for them is a rounding error. They do not care. Sony, their business, by and large, especially now, is PlayStation. That's a large chunk of what they do. For Nintendo, that's everything. How do you get people to buy into your ecosystem? You need exclusives. How do you do that? Well, you could build studios from the ground up, but that's kind of a crapshoot. Or you buy them. You buy their IPs. And then people come to your platform. And people are thinking, oh, well, there's too much money for things to be, not be multi-platform. Can you imagine? And it's like, they don't care about that. They want you in their ecosystem, because once you're in their ecosystem, you spend a lot more money in that ecosystem. You spend money on DLC, you spend money on digital only games, you spend money on, even if you're buying physical stuff, they're getting a cut of every single bit of that. The more you use their service, the more locked in you are. And the more locked in you are, the more likely you are to come back for the PlayStation 6, the PlayStation 7, and so on. This is a long-term thing. And I, for the reasons that you said, I don't think people were thinking about that.
Yeah, not at all. But we've already discussed that in detail. But moving on, here's a topic I never thought I would ever have to discuss. I've done like politics and gaming pieces before, but this one is truly this isn't like, oh, here's politics and here's like how gaming kind of relates. This is a deeply intertwined thing. So in case you didn't know, people, Russia and Ukraine are currently at war. I'm not going into details about that because I feel like if you lived on this planet in any amount of time in the past 2 weeks, you know what's going on. But what you might not know what's going on is that the video game industry, and when I say industry, I don't mean every company that makes video games, clearly, but some, heavy hitters have decided to, either A, stop selling their games in Russia entirely, from indie studios to big publishers. And then in the case of like Sony and Nintendo, Sony Gran Turismo 7 is currently will not be on sale in Russia. Nintendo, I believe the eShop is shut down, but they claim that to be some type of error with the money system. The point is, the industry is purposely denying access to certain games or services entirely to Russia in protest of them invading Ukraine, being at war with Ukraine. And well, I'm going to be completely honest, even though, I see the good in this, I see the merit in this, this is a unprecedented can of worms, because it's like, just if we're going to be real, the world will always be in conflict at some way, shape, or form. That's just how human nature is. That's the history of this planet. That's just how things go. I'm not here to, sing Kumbaya, or wish. I'm just talking about just how it is. So now that you've done this, you've set this precedent. What do you do going forward every time a major conflict happens? It almost seems like now you have to back somebody, because it's a country we easily point, you did for them, but you won't do for us on this scale. Again, if it was just like, if it was only just the usual, and I don't mean to downplay this, voicing your support of something. But, if this was just like the usual Twitter, hey, we're this game company A, we don't support this, our thoughts are with Ukraine, etc. All the PR moves, right or wrong. If it's just that, but no, this is action. This is, because clearly there's gamers in Russia. It's one of the world's biggest countries. And clearly there's people who didn't make this decision, had nothing to do with their process, who now can't game, one way or another, can't buy something they're looking forward to. Maybe they've even already spent money on it, and who's going to, it's just this domino effect that I think has really, it's going to be a big problem in unexpected ways for sure. And that's just how I feel about it. I don't know if there'll be any way to recover from the actions they have chosen to take.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think the interesting question is what happens after, right? Not necessarily for this, because I think the most interesting thing that nobody's talking about is the effect this is going to have on like secondhand digital codes, which a lot of go through Russia and are bought by people in Russia and then resold. So that's interesting. That's going to affect the secondhand market everywhere for that kind of stuff. But also interestingly, this is the thing that we've chosen, I guess, as a group of industry, as an industry, to say this is the line, right? Before it was with China, and Hong Kong and Taiwan and all that stuff, like nobody wanted to make China angry. You want to make everybody okay, right? And war is different. But how do you react when China does something, right? Because they might. What do you do? Where's the line? How does this affect something? I think it's easier with Russia because you look at it and it's a smaller market. It's kind of divorced from the rest of like the world at this point by a bunch of other things, all these other sanctions. What do you do if it's China? How do you navigate that? Because that's a big difference, right? You think of just the difference in size of the market. And also, when this is over, because it will eventually be over at some point in some way, at what point as a company do you start thinking about, should we go back to Russia? How do we do that? Will they even let us? Right? You've opened this box that nobody really knows what's going to come out of it because you've set up, this is the precedent now. When something else happens, this is what we did before, right? So you're opening yourself up to criticism if you decide not to do that again, or if you decide to do that again for whatever scenario comes up. And B, you've exited this market. Eventually you'll want to come back. You might not be able to. I think it's a very strange thing. Like for certain things, yeah, great. Sanction oil, but like games, what? Interesting choice.
Yeah, because okay, let's just say if this was something like if games was somehow regulated by the UN, NATO, your government, it would just be easy. This is just government sanctions. This was a ruling made by the government. When the sanctions are over, back to business. It's there's no burning of bridges per se. You know what I'm saying? This is just you following the rules of your government. But this is a choice by a company. And like you said, I see the good that's like this is where we stand. This is the line. But like you said, China's a great example. China has too much power and too big of a market to go against. If we're looking at the world as a business, you as a business do not shake the boat of one of your biggest customers, like a huge percentage of your profit margin. You just don't. And that's why, right or wrong, that's why when things happen in China, people tiptoe, do what they can, but ultimately the best thing they can do is, I guess, choose to take no side. Mm-hmm. And like you said, this is the president, and it I guess, basically exactly what you said. So let's say China does something and it's like, okay, we're not going to do anything. We're just going to be like, ooh, that's bad. But then it becomes, this weird tango of, so you'll do it as long as it doesn't hurt your profit. And there's no, this is a complicated issue, people. And, I'm not going to sit here and act like it's not. But to even further complicate things, so itch.io has made the best bundle I ever seen in my life. So basically for $10, you get $6,500 worth of games. You get a total of 991 things, most of them being games. So, if you love indie games, if you're, you use itch.io, it's a giant range of games. Like I said, people, almost 1,000 games are in there for $10. And, it's the help, support, build Ukraine. And that's just insane to me. That's a huge thing to do. And it's just like, I thought I would never see the day where games would take such a stance on these things, but I can honestly, I don't know if it's the right move, because I go back to 2020 when it was all about support Black creators, hire Black voices, and yada yada yada. That ultimately has left I would argue, a huge crevice in the industry, because the industry did none of that. There were no, you basically saw no new Black voices. There were no new hires. The voices you saw had already been there, and the voices that elevated were tossed to the wayside the second it stopped being the thing to do. And I could easily see this going the same way, but the risk these things will cause, I just feel, will be much greater, not than the Black lives, but just the continual, I will say, performance of the industry and world events, I feel like will ultimately keep being more and more detrimental to gaming, in a way that I feel like if gaming isn't directly involved, that I'm just going to be blunt, it should probably stay out of world affairs of this nature.
Mm-hmm. And to me, it's really interesting what they did and more what they didn't do, right? Activision or any of these publishers that have made these things could have come out and said, you know what, we're setting up a fund. If you buy, products through our store, if you buy some of our stuff, we will donate X amount of money, right? They could have, and some of them set up stuff that they would match contributions for their employers. They could have done something like that in public. They could have, people have done that before, right? For a wide variety of causes. Companies have done that for a wide variety of causes to say, we will not sell anything in this territory. That's a huge leap. And again, to your point, I think, you're kind of crossing a Rubicon where you might not be able to come back from this in a way that you like. And if you do have to keep doing this, it's going to be detrimental because it's going to have an impact in ways that you can't foresee yet.
Yeah, man, it's really interesting. And one of the things people like to say is the video game industry is young, yada, yada, yada. It is compared to everything else. We're talking century-old industries to one that can, let's be real, probably didn't really have its true birth until the 80s. Mm-hmm. Of course, games existed, but as we see them today, I would argue that, the latest we can say is probably like, 1980 up until now, which, is less than 50 years, honestly. If we want to talk about modern gaming, if I'm being real, if we go back to like the first thing we can call maybe like an electronic game, we're talking about an industry that's maybe 60, maybe 70 years old, and that's stretching it. And so, yeah, of course, as it grows, it needs to be aware because, it's one of the biggest industries on the planet. So, of course, it's going to have to grow and take stances at some point in things. But, and I get that, but it's just like, unlike so many other things on this planet, gaming is an art in the same. I look at gaming like music. How they say, music doesn't belong to one person. Music belongs to mankind, to be poetic. And I kind of feel like gaming's like that too. Gaming is a space where literally we're all on the even playing field. I can't think of any other thing where, able-bodied, disabled, orientation, gender, how you view yourself, man, woman, he, she, they, just literally as long as you are a human being, you can game and more or less, game on the same capacity as the person next to you. Of course, that's not true for every game, but, like, you can help, even the barrier of entry, like, isn't even limited to age. A 3 to 4-year-old can learn how to play like Bejeweled. They can learn how to even play something competitively against another player, given enough time and things. And to me, depriving, again, I know I'm being politic, but depriving anybody, regardless of, territory or the situation of gaming, is like depriving that someone as basic as, like art or the sunshine. Like, I just don't think it's something you can really do with gaming. To me, how I see and view gaming, on the world scale.
Right. And I agree with you. And I think the other problem is that you're not punishing the people who are making decisions in this case, right? Like the idea of the other stuff that's being done is, okay, I'm going to make it really economically uncomfortable for you to take this path. What are you doing by making sure that people can't buy Call of Duty in your region? Realistically, you're saying, okay, you can't buy Call of Duty. To someone who probably hasn't done anything, wrong. They haven't done anything to deserve this. And now you've basically said, you can't participate in this art form anymore. I guess, yeah, it looks good, right? It makes us feel good, but I think I would feel better by seeing more stuff like that huge bundle, right? That we could contribute and make a difference to that way on a humanitarian scale, as opposed to we're going to deny you this thing.
Yeah, because, and I mean, like you said with the codes and stuff, and then how we seen in China, their government, denies them gaming. No, I don't know what the exact numbers is, but the majority of games that's released to the wider world aren't released in China. And they found a way. You know what I'm saying? They have found a way. They have their own unique consoles. That's why PC gaming's big there. Emulation and things like that. And we always say shame on China for doing this, but and at least the way I'm looking at it, this is no different than what China does to their people.
Yeah, we're doing it, and from this standpoint, I guess there's a moral high ground, maybe, but also, again, there's ways to to take a side without pulling stuff out of people's hands.
Yeah. So going forward, this situation is resolved. You know, games are allowed back in Russia. 100% or whatever the sanctions are from whatever rich companies. We're all gravy. And then this is my thing. Okay, a big situation happens, but it's not so cut and dry. It's easy to vilify Russia here. You know what I'm saying? It's not hard. But what if it's something that's like it's France versus Italy? Something that's just like both these countries seem to have good relations with the rest of the world. None of them seem to have a leader that is polarizing one way or the other. And is it just the spoils go to victor? We pick the side that's losing. Because silence is powerful, and I think that's the thing that people forget. Once you break your silence and you decided to take stance on things, when you ultimately realize you can no longer take a stance, that silence, it's been quoted, multiple people throughout history, but it's true. Your silence is deafening, and then that's it.
Yeah. And I don't know, when you speak, you're right. You lose the ability to do that, to by not saying anything, show exactly where you stand. And then once you've spoken on this thing, you, like you said, you open that can of worms. Where is it next? And if it is, something where who is right, who chooses? This is a pretty cut and dry, black and white, like there's right and wrong in this scenario. That's not always going to be the case. And if you've opened this door, it's really hard to close it again.
Yeah. Just to lighten the mood, I remember I wrote an article a long time ago, like it was during one of the presidential elections, and I did a piece where like it was a Master Chief and Mario, or where the candidates, and like the thing was like who would be the running mates in like the video game world, and what games would be supporting who and why. And I'm like, well, that's really good too. Like we're like, once our generation takes over and we're the old people running things supposedly. And, it's election year 2040, whatever. And it's like, hi, I'm Odo Harmer, and I'm endorsed by Mario's Epic Quest 3 coming to Nintendo 5. Like you have endorsements, like you're backed by like game companies or games themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, yeah, that'd be fun. I don't know. It probably wouldn't be fun, but it's fun to think about now.
Oh my gosh, I'm just imagining like Nintendo characters on like propaganda posters for like, we want you to vote,
Uncle Sam's been replaced by like Mario in a hat.
Mm-hmm. Like a very realistically rendered Mario with like, you can see all the hairs in his mustache. I want you.
Yeah, I mean, why not? I mean, we had AOC in Animal Crossing, so I mean, who's to say, right?
Yeah, right. And maybe it's the next congressional candidate who's like, I'm gonna campaign in Among Us. You have to play Among Us. Like that's.
I mean, we've seen it. We have seen it before, and someone brought up an interesting point. I promise we're done with this topic, but they said if you look back in the early '90s, when we were growing up, it was like Mortal Kombat. Oh no, dangerous and bad for your kids, and oh no, that Grand Theft Auto, and oh no, just insert game here, shoot 'em ups. And then someone brought up a great point to me one time. I was having a conversation. They said, why those conversations stopped? And I was like, why? He's like, because the old people got too old and got out and got replaced by people who grew up with games and didn't see them as a problem. They like people who played games understood what a game was. Just they were there. They were finally, even if they weren't a gamer per se, they had played games growing up and knew that nothing in Mortal Kombat was gonna make you punch someone over a bridge. Mm-hmm. And and it made me realize like, well, what's gonna happen when people who grew up in the technological age and know these things continuously replace the people in political power? That's why I was like, maybe we could just see some crazy quote unquote just campaigning and things like that, because it's like, yeah, I mean, I had an iPad in my hand since I was 2. Not me, but the people coming up now. I still grew up in the Stone Age of pre-internet.
Cassette tapes. What
Good
a time.
times. Good times, right? Good times.
Good times.
Well, to continue our very intellectual conversation, one thing that's been in the news, it's always constantly in the news because anytime a AAA title is released, we have these people like, oh, IGM was paid by so and so to give this game an 8. Kotaku was paid by so and so to give this game a 7. Oh, Game Informer was paid by, I don't know, GameStop. What? GameStop owns them. Conspiracy. and, and we get these things. Mostly we see with AAA titles, and again, most recently Elden Ring. Got a lot of 10 out of 10 perfect scores across the board. So of course, From Software, went and gave everybody a briefcase of money and was like, you only got a week to review this game, give it a 10. And then similarly, so even when a game isn't that, we have this, game got an 8. Ugh. Of course. And so we have this thing where we talked about this personally, but it's polarizing because from the community, they don't trust game critics because they feel like it's all the same. And then from our standpoints, we see game criticism as, a critical eye of just, there's a balancing act of, I have to review this game, I have to get it out. And, and sometimes it's done well and sometimes it's done not. But I guess the thing is, do we need to redefine how we review games? And do we need to temper expectations on, from both inside and out the industry of not always expecting reviews a day before launch, right at launch, or like a day after?
Yes is the answer to those questions. It's very funny to me because I am a person who traditionally does not trust the majority of people who review things, and this includes games. Several people, there's exceptions, right? People who are my colleagues who I trust your opinion, I trust your taste, but a lot of this is because I think, from a PR standpoint, people are not getting the codes in time that they need as far as the embargoes go, and everyone's like has to be there day one, because it's driven by clicks, right? You got to have that Elden Ring review day one because there's going to drive a lot of traffic. In the same way, I think we've had this discussion about whether or not people understand what this process is, right? Most people don't really understand what goes into a review embargo, what you can and can't talk about, what, your timeline is. As another one, finishing games, which I'm sure we'll get into in depth. But all of these things, like there's this expectation that, somebody handed you a briefcase full of cash. I have never been handed a briefcase full of cash. I wish someone wanted to hand me a briefcase full of cash. You want Barbie Horse Adventures 5 to get a 10 out of 10? Sure thing, buddy. But that's not how it works. And most of the time, the writers don't even control what they can and can't talk about. There's an embargo. You signed it. And even if you don't hit the embargo date, by accepting the copy of the game in the first place, you're agreeing to their embargo conditions, whether or not you meet the embargo, if you publish it a week later because the servers have problems or something. So this idea of like, critics are being paid, critics are unfair, critics are biased in some ways. And sure, some of us probably are biased. I like the Xbox controller better than the PlayStation controller. I'll tell you that straight up. But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to say God of War is a good game because I have to use a PlayStation controller, right? So I don't know where some of this stuff comes from, but I don't know.
Yeah, but it's completely insane, even in the sense that so one of the wildest things I ever experienced in my professional gaming career is the Pokemon controversy, because that's the last game I would just ever expect to have a controversy in any way, shape, or form. And the fact that the controversy was that a game that was not out to the public, a game that most people have not touched, they were upset. They were leaving in excess because it received a good score off a bit of news that didn't affect gameplay per se, but just a bit of news of being like, not every Pokemon will be in this game. People rioted in the streets. And when I say people, I mean random people on the internet who probably weren't maybe going to buy the game to begin with. I don't know, because the game still outsold most previous titles that came before it anyway. So a lot of good that does. And the community, I feel like they've gotten this weird sensation. And when I say the community, of course not everybody, but enough. Whatever the graph chart is, enough. It's right there. The dot is at enough. People have got this notion that how I feel about a game before it comes out needs to be reflected in the reviews. Like, if I deem this game to be unworthy, there's no way it can be worthy. And any review that says so must just be, paid off. And it's one of those things where, if you have a lawyer friend or anyone's been in the court system, they'll tell you, it's the truth. The truth doesn't matter. It's all about what you can prove. Mm-hmm. And I feel like the game criticism's gotten to this point. Like, it doesn't matter if the game is good or not. It just matters what people believe. Mm-hmm. I don't care if you wrote a 12,000 word response to perfectly eloquate why this game is a 7. I believe it should be a 5 or a 10. And I don't know how to stop it. I don't even know how it started.
I think people are in a position, and I think a lot of criticism of popular mass media comes through this way, where people don't want to be told what someone's opinion on the product is. They want that person who is in the position of authority as the reviewer, as the critic, to validate them emotionally and how they feel in response to this thing, whatever the thing is, be it a film or a game or whatever, right? They want you to say, yes, my emotional reaction to this, that this game is going to be the greatest game ever made, is right. I remember several years ago, I reviewed a version of MLB The Show, and I could not tell you what year it was. But I reviewed it, and I gave it an 8. Good score. I thought it was like, this is a good baseball game, right? I don't think it's, this is a great baseball game. I just didn't give it a 9 or a 10 because I was like, it's great. It was a great game. That's what an 8 means on our scale. That's the score I'm going with. And when the game came out, when the review was published, before the game was even out, I remember the comment section of this review just being flooded with people who are like, how could you possibly give this game an 8? The show is at least a 9. And I'm just like, it's not even out for 3 more days. How? Like, you haven't played it, right? You can't know how the game is yet. And yet, people have this reaction. And I think this goes back to whether or not critics are trusted. And I think this also goes... Can I bring up the finishing games for review point now?
Oh, yeah, most definitely.
Okay, because I think this goes back to it, right? This idea of, and people have been in this argument on Twitter a bunch, and it's one of the 3 game discourses that just goes on repeat, right? Game difficulty, do you need to finish a game to review it? Accessibility, right? Those 3 things, over and over and over and over and over and over and over. And this idea of whether or not critics are trusted, and I think a large part of this is because people will admit, hey, I didn't finish the game. I have, and I will tell you straight up, I have reviewed games I did not finish. I had 3 days for a 72-hour JRPG. It's not happening. I can't do it. I have to be able to make money, right? Like, I have to, and I'm not proud of that. I did the best I could. I put a lot of time into that game, but the reality is, in some places, it's not necessarily the writer's fault. And also, the writer should not be saying, hey, it's okay to finish this thing, to not finish this thing and review it and tell you that this is the way the thing is. Now, in some cases, sure, if you're reviewing a fighting game, do you need to play through the story mode with every single character? No. You can get an idea of how the fighting game plays, right? If you were reviewing, like, League of Legends when it came out, you don't need to have to be able to play every champion. You don't need to play every single build. That's, some games don't have an ending. But I think back to the Mass Effect 3 release a lot when this comes up. Because I remember Mass Effect 3 came out. Overwhelming critical praise, right? Then people got their hands on it. And they got to the ending. And it was a disaster. And I wonder, every now and then, how many people who reviewed that game finished it. Because I don't know how you get through that review and don't say, man, this ending. Man, this ending. Even if you're not allowed to mention the ending directly because of the embargo, you can say, hey, man, the story goes to some places that are really bizarre and don't quite fit, right? There's ways around embargoes. You can talk about stuff without directly talking about it. But this idea of, oh, you don't need to finish the game. Oh, you can play it on easy. You can play it in a way that, most people will not represent it, and that's okay. And this is normal, and this is something that we as critics should do and do regularly. That breaks people's trust. of what they come to us for, which is an informed opinion on this thing, ideally free from bias, or if you can't get away from it, being like, hey, these are the things that I have an issue with. I'm going to let you know right out of the gate, right? And even if you tell them, hey, this is my thoughts based on a game I haven't finished yet, this is where I am so far, people will be willing to go with you. But I think a large part of it comes from this idea that this is an easy job, you should at least do this one thing, and you shouldn't be trying to justify it to us. Because there is no world in which someone would review Moby Dick and stop at page 150. We wouldn't do this for any other medium.
Oh man, I mean, I agree wholeheartedly. Like you said, that's the easy way. You wouldn't review a movie and not see the end. You wouldn't review a book and not make it to the last chapter and finish it. And I do get the point that some people, the argument is like, does the story matter to this game? And I honestly truly believe, how can you say that until you finish it?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's plenty of games where maybe all the stories at the end. Maybe once you get to the end, you realize a story that was there that you didn't see before. There's so many things that can happen within the end. There's a twist. You were the villain the whole time. And, that revelation completely, I think of a game like Nier, they say, I haven't played Nier only because I played the original Xbox release. And that game was like, oh man, this game is hot garbage. And yes, I didn't review it, but after like 5 hours in and the game was like, you've done nothing that matters yet, I was like, I ain't got time for this, people. But that's my opinion. I won't go write a review but Nier is a good example of that game apparently doesn't make any sense until you beat it 5 times, upside down, in reverse. I'm joking, but you get the point. There's so many things because games are an experience. They are fundamentally different from any form of medium. And yes, gameplay matters, I would argue the most, but sometimes not always. That's the unique thing about games. They have to be played. And there's so many things that, one of my favorite examples, any Metal Gear game, Shadow of the Colossus, hell, even some JRPGs, even though it takes 100 hours to get there, hell, Final Fantasy 15. I always tell people this, slight spoiler for Final Fantasy 15. You don't see the true title card of the game until the end. And boy, did it make a world of difference.
Yeah, it does.
It's just... And me and you talked about this probably, Will. I always tell people this. The Last of Us is a masterpiece in my mind. But not only is that game not good until the literal last word and then before the fade to black, it's not a masterpiece until then. Like, literally, that game went from like a 7 to a 10 in less than a second in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just how impactful and powerful indies can be. And granted, okay, you have something like Apex Legends. Like I said, that game is endless. It does it have a story? I mean, I guess, yeah, it did eventually with comic strips, but yeah, and and you break people's trust to be like, I didn't finish this game. And sometimes that might be okay. But then you have a Mass Effect 3 situation, and like I said, once that trust is broken, and what I think is, of course, one, we need longer we need longer periods of times for people to get codes to play the game fully and stuff. And I understand, as now I'm in PR, I've been on both sides of this coin now. Sometimes that's just not possible for just a multitude of reasons. A deal with Sony, gotta go gold, red tape, checks, balances. Like, okay, like we're gonna meet our due date, but like it's not gonna be ready to be played until, XYZ. And then you're thinking like, and sometimes you can't control that because look at Cyberpunk 2077. When you feel the pressure too much, sometimes that's what can happen. I think Cyberpunk 2077 is actually a phenomenal game. But the unfortunate is it released before it was ready, and it was unplayable to many people, and most people are going to come back to it. And what I'm going to say is going to sound like philosophical, but I don't think it's not. Because I feel like there shouldn't be a need to have a game, the review be there day one. Because like, okay, one, if I plan on playing a game, I might look at the number score, but I'm really not going to dive deep into review until either A, I'm a good ways through the game, or B, done with it. That's just how I don't, depending on some games I might read through, but it just depends. And I feel like most people, like you said, you get the game. Chances are, if it's a game you could beat in the day or just over the weekend, the reviewer's probably gonna been done, had their chance with it. You know what I'm saying? But if it's something like an Elden Ring, the average person is gonna take them a good month to see what all there is to see. You have ample time to get a review up, and the thing is, people, games, unlike a movie, a game's lifespan exists well after release. People are gonna be people still playing Rise, and people still gonna be playing Elden Ring well into maybe summer. I feel like you truly won't lose those clicks because there's always going to be a constant feed of, once your review does go up, people will be like, Reddit and the Twitter space like, oh, the review is up here. Oh, now it's up here. And maybe you won't even have to compete for clicks because your reviews go up at different times. And so I really think the game industry, if collectively, if they all went, we will get this review up when we feel it's ready within, a week, two, maybe even a month, depending on what that game is. And, and one of the things we talked about this too is games are something that hit different. They hit different on a second and third playthrough. They hit different after a week away from it. They hit different jumping right back into it. Like, one of the things I love about games is so many games you don't understand how to play until a third, halfway, hell, maybe even towards the end. And then once you jump back in a playthrough and now you have the knowledge of what you're supposed to be doing, your experience could be greatly different. So much different. So you could be like, what I thought was frustrating was just truly lack of understanding. And vice versa. I like Elden Ring. Like, I hate it right now. Maybe one day, I'll get it. I'll get good. I'll stop sucking. I'll start over and be like, lack of knowledge. That's on me. And so I feel like we as critics need to take a stance and be like, we want to give you better quality and this is how it's going to happen. And then the communities go, okay, we understand we won't get these reviews day one. And maybe there's a middle ground like, okay, the game launches, here's the in progress review. Here's the where I'm at, how much I've done, how I'm feeling about now. And like everything, that's the new format. Every launch is a in progress review unless the game was given to you a month prior. You beat it in a week. You had all the time to stew on it. Go look out a window, touch grass, as people love to say nowadays. All that good stuff. But I think criticism in gaming fundamentally needs to change somehow.
And I think the way that we do it is we need to be more honest with the audience about what we're doing. Right? Whether this is a review in progress, yes, I finished it, no, I didn't. Here's my experience with the thing. There is value in someone who has never played a Souls game reviewing Elden Ring. And there's value in framing a review that way. There's value in framing it of the way of, I took my time, I did not rush through it in a week. And you know what? This is how I feel, which most people will do, right? They'll play it over a long period of time. If you're rushing through it in a week, your experience will be different, whether good or bad, because you have to move quickly. You won't have time to sit with it. And you need those things. And I think if we are just honest about what this process is, what it looks like for us, how we approach it as critics, people are going to give us, the benefit of the doubt that we're being honest with them, that we're trying to do it in the way that is good for them as readers and honest as critics.
I mean, well said. And I anytime I talk about this, people always go, well, the community will hate that. The community hates everything. It's just like, I feel like we've gotten to a point where you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Mm-hmm. So in my mind, you have nothing to lose by trying to change and improve that formula. Because at the end of the day, we improved game journalism as a whole and lost nothing from the community. Like, if the community still wants to be brats, well, they were already brats. But now the medium as a whole has been elevated, and they can't do nothing but improve things some way, shape, or form.
And if nothing else, I will say this: we should have enough pride in our work and what we do, what we get paid to do, which we're very lucky to get. We should have enough pride in the work that we do to do it in a way that is honest and in a way that is transparent and in a way that actually makes it sound like we care. And if nothing else, if not for the community who you cannot always please, and you will not always please everyone, we should do it for ourselves to make it better for the people who are going to come into the space after us and for us as critics.
also, I'm just want to let anyone know listening that, I post my address from time to time. So if you have a problem, you can just, show up and we can talk it out like adults. You have to be 18 or plus to show up to my house. I'm sorry. You have to be an adult. I'm not going to jail for you and your nonsense. but yeah, it's just like you say, like it has to be a pride thing. And again, I know clicks drive things and there's money involved, but there's a certain point where I feel like if your site is big enough, you won't lose clicks in any financial hurting way. Because like I said, games have long shelf lives. And if the game isn't that long, then there more is a greater chance that there won't be a rush anyway. But like something for Elden Ring, every reviewer, not every reviewer, but most reviewers came out and were like, I haven't beat this game. It's a 10 out of 10. And like you said, that's just a bad look. And I'm not calling out any one reviewer specifically, because I'm pretty sure they still feel like it was a 10 out of 10 whenever they got to a place to sit, reflect, stew on it. And I think some people did, there was again, this discourse, like you said, it always circles around. But, again, if the stigma wasn't there, then, it wouldn't have to be that. But, and also I want to point out, Elden Ring is a special case. This is like, the JRPG of open worlds. So yeah, like I was making a joke the other day that like I played the game. I played the game for not a couple, but like maybe I made like 15, maybe 20 hours, and I feel like I've done nothing. Like if there's like a progress meter, I'm at like 1%. Like I'm at the same amount of progress since I walked out the cave where I am now. But I digress. Will, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for bringing all your opinions, your passion, everything you had to say. Where can the people find you, keep up with you, and all that good stuff?
You can find me on Twitter at Will Borger. That's Burger with an O, Borger. I'm always there to stir some controversy, so find me there.
Nice. And as always, you can find this show anywhere podcasts is found. You can find us on the web at FC Podcast 23 on Instagram and Twitter. And of course, you can find me at Harmon Jr. on all your favorite social media. And remember, people, like, share, subscribe. It's free 99. I mean, you're already here. You made it this far. Might as well drop a review. All that good stuff. But until next time, as always, be blessed and have a great week. Peace.